What happens when a world-weary waitress drowning in debt finally snaps? What happens when her target isn't just any rude customer, but Julian Thorne, the city's most ruthless tech billionaire? Stella's voice didn't shake as she stood in the opulent dining room of Le Bernardin, her apron feeling like armor, and delivered a verbal lashing that silenced the entire restaurant. She expected to be fired, to be blacklisted, to fall even deeper into despair. What she didn't expect was what arrived at her tiny apartment the next day. In a sleek black box with no return address was a card made of solid metal, an American Express Centurion card, a black card. And it wasn't a peace offering. It was a test. Stella Hayes felt the familiar ache blooming between her shoulder blades, a dull throb that radiated down her spine. It was the physical manifestation of her life, a constant heavy pressure. Tonight that pressure felt like the sterling silver tray she was balancing, laden with 2 flutes of vintage Dom Perignon that cost more than her month's rent. The restaurant Aurelia was a temple of modern gastronomy in the heart of Manhattan, a place where money wasn't just spent, it was vaporized in clouds of truffle foam and reductions of 100-year-old balsamic. For Stella, it was a gilded cage. Every night she put on the crisp black uniform, tied her auburn hair into a severe knot, and painted on a smile that didn't reach her tired green eyes. She was a ghost in this world, expertly navigating tables of hedge fund managers, aging socialites and tech moguls, while her own reality crumbled. Her mother's medical bills were piled on her small kitchen table, a mountain of debt that grew with every new prescription. Her dream of finishing her degree at the New York Academy of Art was fading the half-finished canvases in her cramped studio apartment, gathering dust and reproach. She had a keen eye, the kind that saw beyond the Patek Philippe watches and Chanel handbags. She saw the desperation in a banker's laughter, the loneliness in a wife's diamond-heavy gaze, the sheer boredom of people who had everything and felt nothing. It was this artist's eye that made her both an excellent waitress, attentive to the smallest details, and a deeply cynical one. Tonight was different. There was a buzz in the air, a nervous energy that coiled around the staff. The maitre d', a perpetually stressed man named Jean-Luc, had briefed them in his clipped French accent. "Table 7 for 4. It is Mr. Julian Thorne. No mistakes. Aucune erreur." Julian Thorne. Even his name sounded like expensive steel. The 30-something CEO of EtherSync Dynamics, a man who had built a trillion-dollar empire on predictive algorithms and cloud infrastructure. He was a legend, a phantom. He was known for 3 things: his genius, his staggering wealth, and his utter contempt for the people he considered beneath him. Stories of him eviscerating board members and firing executives via a one-word text were Wall Street lore. Stella felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. She was assigned to his section. "Just breathe, Stella," whispered Maria, another waitress, as she passed by with a bread basket. "Smile, nod, and become invisible. That's the key." Stella nodded, but the advice felt hollow. Becoming invisible was her specialty, but sometimes the weight of the silver tray, the weight of it all, made her want to do the exact opposite. It made her want to scream. They arrived 20 minutes late, a whirlwind of entitlement. Julian Thorne was exactly as the tabloids painted him, tall with sharp, angular features and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He wore a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit, so dark it seemed to absorb the light around it. He didn't walk into the room. He occupied it, his presence, immediately diminishing everyone else. He was flanked by 2 associate sycophants, with identical gleaming watches and forced smiles, and a stunning woman in a red dress who looked more like an accessory than a companion. They didn't acknowledge Stella as she approached. Julian was scrolling through his phone, one eyebrow slightly arched, in a look of permanent dissatisfaction. "Good evening," Stella began, her voice a calm, practiced melody. "Welcome to Aurelia. May I start you with some water, still or sparkling?" Julian didn't look up. He waved a dismissive hand. "Get me the 98 Lafitte, and don't bother with the sommelier's theatrics. Just open it." The 98 Lafitte Rothschild, a $4,000 bottle of wine. "Of course, sir," Stella said, her smile not faltering. The evening went downhill from there. It wasn't one single egregious act, but a slow, agonizing campaign of disrespect. He spoke at her, not to her, his orders clipped and impersonal. He sent back his seared foie gras, claiming the temperature was off by at least 2 degrees. It was a ridiculous, impossible complaint, designed only to assert dominance. When Stella returned with a new plate, prepared with painstaking speed by the frantic kitchen staff, he didn't even look at it, letting it sit untouched while he took a call. His voice, a low, brutal monotone that made one of his associates visibly pale. Stella watched him, her artist's eye cataloguing the details. The way his perfectly manicured fingers never stopped moving, either tapping his phone or drumming on the table. The way his eyes, when he did look up, were utterly devoid of warmth or curiosity. He wasn't seeing a restaurant or food or people. He was seeing a series of transactions of inputs and outputs, all of which were failing to meet his impossible standards. He was a man living inside a fortress of his own making, and the only window looked out onto a world of his own reflection. The breaking point came with dessert. The woman in red, who had barely spoken a word all night, finally voiced a quiet preference. "The Valrhona chocolate sphere sounds lovely." Julian scoffed, not even looking at her. "No, that's pedestrian." He glanced at the menu for a fraction of a second before snapping it shut. He turned his cold gaze on Stella. "You, the waitress. What's your name?" It was the first time he had acknowledged her as an individual. "Stella, sir. Stella." He repeated the name, tasting like ash in his mouth. "My guests and I require something memorable. Not on this menu. Have your pastry chef create something. Tell him it's for Julian Thorne. He'll understand the imperative. Don't disappoint me." He then turned back to his phone, the conversation over. He hadn't asked his guests what they wanted. He hadn't considered the kitchen's capabilities or the chef's artistry. He had simply issued a decree. Stella stood frozen for a moment. It was the casual erasure of everyone around him, his date, the chef, her, that finally broke through her professional veneer. She saw her mother waiting for a call about her latest test results. She saw her canvases, their vibrant colors dulled by a layer of city grime. She saw a lifetime of being told to be quiet, to be invisible, to smile and nod. And in that moment, the weight on her shoulders shifted from a burden to fuel. She turned not towards the kitchen, but back to the table. The gentle hum of the dining room, the clink of cutlery, the murmur of hushed conversations, the soft jazz quartet in the corner seemed to fade into a dull roar in Stella's ears. She walked back to table 7, her steps deliberate, her posture no longer that of a deferential servant, but of an equal. She stopped beside Julian Thorne. He didn't look up. He was typing a furious message on his phone. "Mr. Thorne," she said. Her voice was quiet, yet it cut through the air with the precision of a scalpel. He ignored her. One of his associates, a man named Peterson, shot her a panicked look, mouthing, "Go!" Stella did not go. "Mr. Thorne," she repeated a little louder this time. "You asked for something memorable. I have a suggestion." Finally, with an exaggerated sigh of irritation, he lifted his head, his stormy eyes locking onto hers. "This had better be good, Stella." This was it. The point of no return. The entire restaurant hadn't noticed yet, but Jean-Luc the maître d' was already moving towards them from across the room, his face a mask of horror. "My suggestion," Stella said, her voice clear and steady, "is a lesson in basic human decency. It's not on the menu, but it's a specialty of the house for those who desperately require it. It's free of charge." A collective gasp went through the neighboring tables. Conversation stopped. Forks paused midway to mouths. Julian Thorne's associates looked as if they were about to witness a car crash in slow motion. The woman in red stared at Stella, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. Julian's face, which had been a mask of bored arrogance, slowly transformed. A dangerous stillness settled over him. He placed his phone face down on the table with deliberate slowness. "What did you just say to me?" he asked, his voice a low, menacing purr. "You heard me," Stella continued, her heart hammering against her ribs, but her resolve hardening into steel. "You come in here with your monumental wealth and your cavernous emptiness, and you treat everyone around you like they're just scenery in the movie of your life. You dismiss your guests, you belittle the staff, and you demand memorable experiences as if they can be ordered up like a side of fries." She took a step closer, lowering her voice, so it was both intimate and intensely public. "You want to know what's memorable? The terror in your associate's eyes, because he knows his career hangs on your every whim. The quiet humiliation of your date, who you've rendered completely invisible tonight. The frantic sweat on the brow of a world-class chef, because you, a man who probably survives on protein bars and coffee, have decided his art isn't good enough for your palate." She leaned in slightly, her green eyes boring into his. "You sit there surrounded by the finest things money can buy, but you are the poorest man in this room. Your suit is Tom Ford, but your manners are from a back-alley bargain bin. You consume everything and appreciate nothing. You are a black hole in a bespoke suit. So no, I will not ask the chef to create a monument to your ego. The most memorable thing you will receive tonight, sir, is the truth." Silence. It was absolute. The entire dining room, from the buses by the service station to the couple celebrating their 50th anniversary by the window, was frozen watching the spectacle. Julian Thorne stared at her. His face was unreadable, a blank canvas of shock. He wasn't angry, he wasn't yelling, he just stared. It was as if she had spoken to him in a language he hadn't heard in years, and he was struggling to translate. Jean-Luc finally arrived, his face ashen. "Mademoiselle Hayes." "I am so sorry, Mr. Thorne. This is unacceptable. She is fired immediately. Please allow me to—" Julian held up a single sharp finger, silencing the maître d' instantly. His gaze never left Stella's. For a long, stretched-out moment, the only sound was the frantic beating of Stella's own heart. Then he slowly rose from his chair. He was a good foot taller than her, an imposing figure of power and wealth. Stella held her ground, refusing to flinch. He reached into his jacket, and for a wild second, she thought he might do something drastic. Instead, he pulled out a slim, elegant wallet. He extracted several $100 bills and placed them neatly on the table, enough to cover the exorbitant bill and a generous tip. He looked at his companions. "We're leaving." They scrambled to their feet, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Without another word, without a single glance back at Stella, Julian Thorne turned and walked out of the restaurant. The silence he left behind was deafening. Then Jean-Luc turned on Stella, his face contorted with fury. "Get your things. You are finished. Not just here. I will see to it that you never work in another fine dining establishment in this city again." Stella nodded. She felt strangely calm. As she walked to the staff locker room, untying the apron that felt more like a straitjacket, she didn't feel regret. She felt a terrifying, exhilarating lightness. For the first time in years, the weight was gone. She was broke, jobless, and blacklisted, but she was free. The next 24 hours were a blur of shame and anxiety. Stella woke up on the lumpy mattress in her tiny studio apartment with what she called a consequence hangover. The adrenaline of the previous night had curdled into a thick sludge of dread. The rent was due in a week. Her mother's co-pay for her next round of treatments was due sooner. Her brief, exhilarating moment of freedom now felt like an act of catastrophic self-sabotage. She spent the day in a grim parody of productivity. She tried to sketch, but her hands felt clumsy, the lines on the page mocking her. She updated her resume, deleting Aurelia, and leaving a gaping, inexplicable hole in her employment history. Every online job posting for a position that paid a living wage seemed to taunt her. 3 years of fine dining experience required. Impeccable references are a must. Jean-Luc would ensure hers were anything but. By evening, she was curled up on her worn-out sofa, nursing a cup of cheap tea and staring at a canvas she'd started months ago, a portrait of an old man she'd seen on the subway, his face a roadmap of a life lived with hardship and grace. She had been trying to capture the light in his eyes, a flicker of resilience. Now all she saw was her own failure reflected in the unfinished paint. A sharp buzz from the intercom jolted her out of her stupor. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her friends all knew to call her Cell. "Yeah," she said into the crackling speaker. "Package for Stella Hayes." A muffled voice replied. "Signature required." Confused, she buzzed him in. A minute later, a courier in a crisp uniform stood at her door, holding a small flat box and a digital scanner. The box was stunningly elegant, matte black, with no labels, no logos, no return address. It felt heavy, substantial. "Who's it from?" Stella asked, as she signed her name with a shaky finger. The courier shrugged. "Private client, ma'am. That's all the info I have." He tipped his cap and was gone, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Stella locked the door and carried the box to her small kitchen table, placing it next to the ominous pile of bills. It looked alien in her cluttered, paint-spattered apartment, a piece of another world. Her heart began to pound with a strange mix of fear and curiosity. Was it from Jean-Luc a final insulting severance package? Or worse, some kind of legal notice from Julian Thorne's lawyers? With trembling hands, she lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a single object. It was a card, thick and heavy, also matte black. It was made of anodized titanium, cool and smooth to the touch. In the corner, a familiar silver hologram of a Roman centurion gleamed under the dim light of her kitchen bulb. Stamped in elegant silver lettering was her name, Stella Hayes. An American Express Centurion card. The mythical black card. The ultimate symbol of untouchable wealth and privilege, available by invitation only to the world's 1%ers. It was an object she had swiped for customers hundreds of times, an artifact from the world she had just been violently ejected from. And now it was here in her apartment with her name on it. Underneath the card was a small, stiff envelope, also black. She picked it up. Her name was handwritten on the front in sharp, architectural script. She recognized the handwriting from a signature she'd seen on a credit card slip just last night. Julian Thorne. She slid a finger under the seal and pulled out a single sheet of thick, cream-colored cardstock. There were only a few words printed in the same severe font. Ms. Hayes. You value memorable experiences. So do I. This is not a gift. It is an instrument. What you do with it will determine what happens next. JT Stella sank into her chair, her legs suddenly weak. She stared at the card, then at the note, then back at the card. Her mind reeled. This made no sense. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a threat. It was a puzzle, a challenge, an instrument for determine what happens next. Her first instinct was to destroy it, to cut it up and throw it away as a final act of defiance against a man who thought he could solve everything with money. But her artist's curiosity, the part of her that loved a mystery, a hidden meaning, took over. And then a more practical, desperate thought crept in. The card had no preset spending limit. She looked at the pile of medical bills. She looked at the tuition reminder from the art academy. She looked at her empty fridge. Julian Thorne had given her a weapon, a key to his world. He thought it was a test of her character, a way to see if the fiery waitress with the moral compass had a price. He was daring her to prove him right, to go on a lavish shopping spree and reveal herself as just another greedy hypocrite. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Stella's face. He wanted to see what she would do with it. Fine. She would give him something memorable. She wouldn't play his game. She would invent her own. For 2 days, the black card sat on Stella's table like a dormant viper. She circled it, picked it up, felt its impossible weight, and put it back down. The cryptic note was a constant refrain in her head. It is an instrument. What you do with it will determine what happens next. The temptation to solve her immediate problems was immense. A single swipe could erase the medical debt, pay her tuition for the next year, and fill her cupboards with more than ramen and tea. But she knew with an instinct she couldn't explain that this was the very trap Julian Thorne had set. He expected greed. He expected her to go to Bergdorf's or Chanel to expose the principles she'd so eloquently preached as a hollow performance. He wanted to prove to himself that everyone, even the girl who looked him in the eye and called him empty, could be bought. Stella would not give him the satisfaction. On the 3rd day, she woke up with a plan. It was risky, audacious, and entirely her own. She showered, put on her best and only clean pair of jeans and a simple black sweater, and placed the Centurion card in her worn leather wallet. It felt like planting a bomb in a lunchbox. Her first stop was not a high-end boutique on Madison Avenue. It was a small, dusty art supply store in Brooklyn called Kowarski's Pigments. It was a legendary place run by the 3rd-generation owner, a gruff old man named Samuel Kowarski, who still ground his own pigments by hand. It was a place where true artists went, a place where a single tube of authentic lapis lazuli oil paint could cost hundreds of dollars. Stella had long dreamed of using his materials, but had only ever been able to afford a few sticks of charcoal. She walked in the familiar scent of linseed oil and turpentine washing over her. Samuel looked up from behind a counter, cluttered with jars of raw minerals, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose. "Stella, come to stare at the paints you can't afford again," he asked, his tone gruff but his eyes betraying a hint of affection. He knew her passion. "Not today, Samuel," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Today I'm buying." For the next hour she moved through the shop with the focus of a surgeon. She didn't grab things indiscriminately. She selected 3 large, perfectly stretched Belgian linen canvases. She chose a full set of old Holland classic oils tubes of incandescent color that felt like jewels in her hands. She bought badger hair brushes from Germany and a jar of the coveted lapis lazuli blue, the color of twilight and kings. It was a carefully curated arsenal for an artist preparing for war. She brought her selections to the counter. The total came to $715. Samuel whistled softly, hitting the lottery kid. Stella's hand trembled slightly as she pulled the black card from her wallet. She slid it across the counter. Samuel picked it up, his eyebrows shooting up to his hairline. He looked from the card to Stella and back again. He'd seen these cards before from famous artists and gallery owners. He had never seen one in the hands of the perpetually broke art student who stared at his pigments with heart-breaking longing. He processed the transaction. The machine beeped its approval instantly. "It will be delivered this afternoon," Stella said, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. As she left the store, her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, a private caller. She knew who it was. She let it go to voicemail. This was her timeline, not his. Her next stop was a small independent bookstore in the West Village. She bought first-edition copies of books on artistic theory, Kandinsky's, Concerning the Spiritual, In Art, Berger's Ways of Seeing, and a rare catalogue from a 1980s Basquiat exhibition. These were not trophies. They were tools. Her final stop was the most important. She went to the billing department of Mount Sinai Hospital. She walked past the line of anxious-looking people and straight to the accounts manager's office. She presented her mother's account number and the black card. "I want to pay the entire outstanding balance," she said. "And I want to put a credit of $50,000 on the account for any future treatments." The manager, a woman named Ms. Albright, stared at the card, then at Stella's simple clothes, her face a swirl of confusion. But the card was undeniable. The transaction went through without a hitch. The mountain of debt that had been suffocating Stella for years vanished in a single, silent electronic pulse. As she stepped out of the hospital and into the crisp autumn air, she felt the lightness again. But this time, it wasn't tinged with fear. It was the feeling of a calculated victory. She hadn't bought a single thing for herself, no clothes, no jewelry, no fancy meals. Every purchase was an investment in her art, her knowledge, and her family's well-being. She had used his instrument not for self-indulgence, but for self-actualization. She went home, and as the art supplies were being delivered, her phone buzzed again. The same private number. This time she answered. "Hello." The voice on the other end was not Julian Thorne's. It was female, cool, and impeccably professional. "Ms. Stella Hayes?" "Yes." "My name is Eleanor Vance. I am Mr. Thorne's executive assistant. He has been observing the usage of the account provided to you." Stella's blood ran cold for a second. Observing, of course he was. "The transactions have been unexpected." Eleanor continued, a hint of something unreadable in her tone. "Mr. Thorne requests a meeting with you. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. at the Ether Sink Tower. A car will be waiting for you outside your apartment at 9:30. Please be prompt." The line went dead. Stella looked around her apartment. The canvases were leaning against the wall, pristine and waiting. The jewel-toned paints were lined up on her table. The weight of her mother's illness had been lifted. She had used Julian Thorne's power, but she had channeled it through her own values. He had set a test, and she had just handed in her answer. Now it was time to see if he was smart enough to understand it. The next morning, at precisely 9:30, a black Mercedes S-Class, so sleek and silent, it seemed carved from a shadow, pulled up in front of Stella's gritty apartment building. The driver, a stoic man in a black suit, opened the door for her without a word. The interior smelled of rich leather and quiet power. As the car slid into Manhattan traffic, Stella felt like she was being transported to another dimension, crossing a barrier between her world of turpentine and debt and Julian Thorne's world of glass and data. The Ethersink Tower was a shard of obsidian piercing the sky over Hudson Yards. It was an architectural marvel of sharp angles and dark reflective glass designed to look both beautiful and impenetrable. In the lobby, which was vast and minimalist enough to be an art gallery, the coolly professional Eleanor Vance was waiting for her. She was a tall, severe woman in her 40s, with an immaculate silver bob and an aura of formidable competence. "Ms. Hayes," she said with a curt nod. "Mr. Thorne is waiting. This way." They rode a silent, high-speed elevator that seemed to ascend for an eternity. There were no buttons. Eleanor simply used a keycard. Stella's ears popped as they rocketed upwards. The doors opened directly into an office that felt less like a workspace and more like a celestial viewing platform. 3 of the 4 walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a staggering 270-degree panorama of New York City. The city lay sprawled below them like a blueprint, its noise and chaos rendered silent and insignificant. The furniture was sparse and ruthlessly modern, a massive desk made of a single piece of polished concrete, 2 black leather chairs and nothing else. No photos, no books, no personal effects. It was the office of a man who commanded the world, but did not live in it. Julian Thorne was standing by the window, his back to them, looking down at the city he owned. He was dressed not in a suit, but in a simple dark grey cashmere sweater and black trousers. It was a uniform of casual power, a statement that he no longer needed the armor of a suit. "Leave us, Eleanor," he said, his voice calm and resonant, not turning around. Eleanor vanished as silently as she had appeared. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Stella stood her ground, refusing to be intimidated by the view or the silence. She was not a waitress here. She was a woman who had been summoned. Finally, he turned. His stormy eyes met hers, and this time there was no arrogance in them. There was something else, an unsettling, analytical curiosity. "Kowarski's Pigments," he began, his voice even. "First edition art theory texts. Full payment of outstanding medical debt and a $50,000 forward credit at Mount Sinai. Total expenditure $89,512. Not a single purchase from a luxury brand. No 5-star hotels. No Michelin-starred restaurants." He walked slowly towards her, stopping a few feet away. "I create predictive algorithms, Ms. Hayes. My entire fortune is built on accurately forecasting human behavior based on data. You are a statistical anomaly. I predicted a 97.3% probability that you would spend the first 100,000 on personal luxury goods. You defied the model." "Maybe your model is flawed," Stella said, her voice steady. "Maybe it doesn't account for people who have things they value more than a new handbag." A flicker of something, was it amusement, respect, crossed his face. Indeed, I set a trap to expose a hypocrite. Instead, I found a strategist. You used my money, my instrument, to invest. In your craft, your education, and your family. You didn't just spend it. You allocated it. Like a CEO. He gestured to one of the black leather chairs. "Please, sit." Stella sat perching on the edge of the seat. He remained standing, looming over her. "My tirade at your restaurant was unforgivable," he said, and the directness of the admission surprised her. "But your response was illuminating. You were the first person in a decade who hasn't been paid by me, employed by me, or trying to get something from me to tell me the truth. People like me, we live in an echo chamber. We're surrounded by sycophants who mirror our own opinions back to us. It's poison." He paused, walking back to the window. "My mother was a painter, an amateur but passionate. She died when I was 19. All of her art, her passion, it was sold off with the estate to pay for my father's business debts. I built this entire empire from nothing to get it all back, to build something that would honor her. Last year I established the Thorne Foundation for the Arts. I've poured $2 billion into it. We've acquired a building, hired a board of directors filled with financial wizards, and have an acquisitions budget that could buy a small country." He turned back to her, and for the first time Stella saw a crack in his steel facade. She saw a glimmer of the lonely boy he must have been. "And it's a complete failure," he said, his voice laced with a bitterness that was raw and real. "It's hollow, soulless. The collection we're building feels like a stock portfolio. It's curated by a committee that values auction records over artistic merit. They buy names, not art. They wouldn't know a masterpiece from a hotel lobby painting. My mother's legacy is becoming a monument to my own wealth, the very thing she despised. It's becoming empty. Just like you said I was." He stopped directly in front of her, his gaze intense. "That night at the restaurant, I wasn't just being an arse. I was testing the world, and, as usual, it was failing. Then you came along. You don't just see things, Ms. Hayes. You understand their value, not their price, their value. That is a rare commodity, rarer than a 98 Lafite." He took a breath. "The black card wasn't a test of your price. It was the first stage of a job interview. I am dissolving my current acquisitions committee. I want you to run it. I want you to be the sole curator and head of acquisitions for the Thorne Foundation." Stella stared at him, speechless. The air seemed to have been sucked out of the room. "You want a waitress to run a $2 billion art foundation." "I don't want a waitress," he corrected her, his voice sharp. "I want an artist. I want the person who saw through my bullshit. I want the strategist who used an unlimited credit line to buy lapis lazuli pigment and peace of mind for her mother. I'll give you an unlimited budget, complete autonomy, and a salary that will make your current problems a distant memory. I want you to build a collection that has a soul. I want you to build something memorable." He extended a hand. "The job is yours, Stella, if you want it." Stella looked at his outstretched hand, then at his face. This was insane. It was a fairy tale, a trap, a dream, but it was also the single greatest opportunity she could ever imagine. The chance to not only finish her art degree, but to spend her life surrounded by the world's greatest art, to champion new artists, to build something meaningful. To use the power of a man like Julian Thorne to create beauty instead of just accumulating wealth. She could achieve her wildest dreams by working for the man she had despised just days ago. He was offering her a key, not just to his world, but to her own future. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out and shook his hand. His grip was firm, his hand surprisingly warm. "I have conditions," she said, finding her voice. Julian Thorne smiled, a true, genuine smile that transformed his face. "Somehow I knew you would." Stella's first week at the Thorne Foundation was like being plunged into an Arctic sea. The Foundation's headquarters occupied 3 floors of the Ether Sink Tower, a pristine, white-walled labyrinth of offices and private viewing rooms that felt more like a futuristic laboratory than a home for art. The staff inherited from the previous regime regarded her with a mixture of disbelief and thinly veiled hostility. They were academics, with multiple PhDs, seasoned auction house veterans, and financial analysts who spoke in a rapid-fire language of yields and appreciating assets, and their new boss was a 20-something waitress from Queens. Her official title was Artistic Director, a label Julian had insisted upon. Her predecessor, a stuffy, Cambridge-educated man named Dr. Alistair Finch, had left behind a collection that was technically flawless and emotionally sterile. It was a checklist of big names, a minor Warhol, a late-career Picasso sketch, a derivative Hearst, all purchased at the top of the market. It was, as Julian had said, a stock portfolio masquerading as art. Stella spent her first days in silence, walking through the climate-controlled storage vaults, looking at each piece, not with a curator's eye for provenance, but with her artist's eye for soul. She saw technique without passion, fame without substance. Her first official meeting with the senior staff was a disaster. She walked in wearing a simple but professional dress she'd bought using her own new bank account, not the black card, and faced a boardroom of 10 people in bespoke suits and severe designer outfits who looked at her as if she were a curious and unpleasant specimen under a microscope. She didn't present charts or financial projections. Instead, she put up a slide of a single painting. It was a raw, chaotic, and breathtakingly beautiful piece by an unknown artist from Bushwick named Sophia Reyes, whose work Stella had followed for years. The painting depicted a crowded subway car, but the figures were rendered in vibrant, frantic strokes, their faces a mixture of exhaustion, hope, and defiance. It was a masterpiece of modern urban life. "This," Stella announced, her voice echoing slightly in the sterile room, "is our first acquisition under the new directive. Sophia Reyes. We will purchase her entire collection from her upcoming gallery show and offer her the inaugural Thorne Foundation grant, a 5-year stipend to allow her to work without financial pressure." The room erupted. Marcus Thorne, Julian's cousin, and the Foundation's COO, a slick, calculating man who viewed art as nothing more than another class of asset, was the first to speak. "Are you insane?" he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Who is Sophia Reyes? She has no auction history, no critical recognition. Her work is worthless from an investment standpoint. We could acquire a Chagall sketch for what you're proposing to spend on this. Street art." "Art isn't an investment, Marcus." Stella countered, her calm infuriating him. "It's a conversation. It's a testament. Chagall has had his say. Sophia Reyes is speaking for our time right now. The Foundation's new mission is not to collect trophies from the past, but to champion the voices of the future. We are not a museum. We are a crucible." The staff was in open revolt, but Stella held her ground. She knew she had one ace up her sleeve, Julian's absolute backing. After the meeting, Marcus stormed into Julian's office with Stella being summoned minutes later. "Julian, you have to see this is madness," Marcus raged, pacing in front of the panoramic window. "She's going to turn your mother's legacy into a charity for graffiti artists. Our endowment will be worthless in a decade." Julian sat behind his concrete desk, his fingers steepled, his expression unreadable. He listened to his cousin's tirade for a full 5 minutes without interruption. Then he looked at Stella. "Why this artist?" he asked, his tone quiet and analytical. "Because her work is honest," Stella said simply. "When I look at it, I feel something. It's the same feeling I got when I looked at you in the restaurant. I saw something real underneath a lot of expensive noise. This painting is real. It has integrity. That's what your mother's legacy should be about." Julian was silent for a moment. He looked from his fuming cousin to the determined young woman in front of him. "The acquisition is approved," he said finally. "And the grant. Marcus facilitated. Stella has full authority. That is my final word on the matter." Marcus looked as if he'd been slapped. He shot Stella a look of pure venom before storming out of the office. Stella and Julian were left alone. "You're making enemies," he stated, not as a warning, but as an observation. "I'm not here to make friends," she replied. "I'm here to build a collection with a soul." A fragile alliance began to form between them. Julian, the detached architect of systems, was fascinated by Stella's intuitive, passionate approach. He started joining her on her scouting trips, leaving his glass tower to venture into dusty artist studios in forgotten parts of the city. He was awkward and out of place, a king in a foreign land, but he was watching, learning. He watched as Stella spoke to artists not about their prices, but about their process, their inspiration. He saw how their faces lit up when she spoke, how she saw them in a way no one else had. She wasn't just buying their art, she was validating their existence. One evening, after visiting a cantankerous old sculptor in Red Hook, they found themselves sharing a simple pizza at a hole-in-the-wall joint, a place Julian's driver couldn't even find at first. "You were right," he said, staring at his slice as if it were an alien object. "About the restaurant. About me. I've spent so long building walls and systems I forgot what it felt like to be on the outside. The view is different from down here," Stella said, taking a bite of pizza. "My mother," he said suddenly, his voice soft. "She would have liked you. She would have loved what you're doing." It was the most vulnerable thing he had ever said to her. At that moment, he wasn't Julian Thorne, the tech billionaire. He was just a man trying to honor his mother's memory. And Stella, the waitress, who had once verbally eviscerated him, found herself looking at him and seeing not a black hole in a suit, but a man who was perhaps just as lost as she had been. But Marcus was not one to be defeated so easily. He saw Stella not just as an incompetent fool, but as a threat to his own position, and more importantly, to his quiet, systematic embezzlement through inflated acquisition prices and kickbacks from established galleries, a scheme Julian's data-driven hands-off approach had never detected. Stella's insistence on working with unknown artists and buying directly from them was disrupting his entire operation. He began to plot setting a trap far more sophisticated and dangerous than a simple black card. He would use Stella's greatest strength, her passion for undiscovered art, and turn it into a weapon that would destroy her, discredit the foundation, and remove her from Julian's life for good. He found the perfect bait, a supposedly lost masterpiece by a reclusive genius painter, a story so tragic and romantic he knew Stella wouldn't be able to resist, and the forger he hired was one of the best in the world. The trap was set. The trap was laid, not with steel, but with a story. It began on a Tuesday morning when Marcus Thorne entered Stella's office. This was a rare occurrence. Julian's cousin typically communicated through curt emails or passive-aggressive comments in board meetings. Today, however, he was the very picture of magnanimous cooperation. He held a thin leather-bound folio. "Stella," he began, his tone smooth as polished marble, "I may have something for you, something that fits your unique acquisition philosophy." He placed the folio on her desk, which was cluttered with catalogues from emerging artists and books she had bought from the West Village. "A broker I've worked with in Geneva, a Monsieur Dubois, has come across a rather extraordinary situation," Marcus continued, feigning a hint of skepticism. "It's highly confidential. An estate sale that's being kept completely off the market." Stella opened the folio. Inside were high-resolution photographs of a single stunning painting. It was a large canvas, a maelstrom of deep crimsons, brooding indigo, and a shocking slash of brilliant solar yellow. It was abstract, yet it felt profoundly emotional, evoking a sense of cosmic loneliness and explosive power. It was to Stella's artistic eye a masterpiece. "The artist is Silas Vane Marcus," said, watching her reaction carefully. Stella's breath caught. Silas Vane was a ghost, a legend in the art world. A contemporary of Pollock and Rothko, he was said to have possessed a talent that eclipsed them both. But he was a furious recluse who, disgusted by the commercialism of the New York art scene in the 1950s, bought a remote property in the wilds of New Mexico, destroyed most of his work, and vanished from public life. He died in obscurity decades ago, leaving behind only whispers and a handful of heavily disputed early sketches. Finding a major undiscovered canvas from his reclusive period was the art world's equivalent of finding El Dorado. According to Dubois, Marcus explained Vane's only child, a daughter who respected his wish for privacy, passed away recently. She had kept one painting hidden away her entire life. This one. It's called Echo of a Silent Sun. The estate is being handled quietly to avoid a media circus. They want a single private buyer. A home where the work will be respected, not just flipped at the next auction. He had tailored the bait perfectly. An anti-commercial artist. A legacy of privacy and integrity. A masterpiece hidden from the greedy world. It was a story designed to bypass Stella's logical mind and speak directly to her soul. And it was working. We have to get this. Stella whispered, her eyes glued to the photograph. This was more than an acquisition. It was a resurrection. It was the ultimate validation of her entire mission to find the forgotten souls and give them a voice. Over the next 2 weeks, Stella plunged into the world of Silas Vane. Julian, seeing her passion and trusting her instincts, gave her his full blessing. If you believe in it, I believe in you. He had told her a simple statement of faith that now made Stella's heart ache to think about. Marcus played his part to perfection. He arranged a call with the elegant Monsieur Dubois, whose refined French accent and encyclopedic knowledge of post-war art seemed utterly convincing. He provided a chain of provenance letters from Silas Vane to his daughter, a personal journal entry describing the painting's creation, all of it beautifully, flawlessly forged. Stella, for her part, was not reckless. She insisted on due diligence. She had a small sample of the canvas fiber and a microscopic fleck of paint sent to the Foundation's trusted conservation lab for analysis. This was the most critical part of Marcus's plan. He had spent a small fortune ensuring the forge used only period-authentic materials, Belgian linen from the 1950s, hand-ground pigments with the exact chemical composition Vane was known to have used. The lab report came back clean. The materials were consistent with the supposed date of creation. The final hurdle was the price. The estate through Dubois was asking for $12 million. It was a staggering sum for an artist with no auction record, a figure that made the rest of the board extremely nervous. Marcus used their anxiety to his advantage, positioning himself as the reluctant facilitator of Stella's vision. "It's a massive gamble, Julian," he said in a meeting, his brow furrowed with faux concern. But Stella is convinced of its cultural importance. It's her neck on the line. The statement was designed to do 2 things: pressure Stella to commit, and remind Julian that if this went wrong, the failure would be hers alone. Stella didn't flinch. In her mind, $12 million was an insultingly small price for the soul of Silas Vane. She convinced Julian, her arguments passionate and filled with the conviction of a true believer. The wire transfer was approved. A week later, the painting arrived. It was transported in a climate-controlled high-security crate and delivered to the Foundation's primary private viewing room. Only Stella, Julian, and Marcus were present for its unveiling. When the art handlers lifted the painting from its crate and placed it on the viewing wall, the air left Stella's lungs. The photographs hadn't done it justice. It was a living, breathing thing, radiating a palpable aura of sorrow and defiance. The texture of the paint was thick and visceral, the colors so deep she felt she could fall into them. It was everything she had dreamed it would be. "It's magnificent," Julian said, his voice hushed with genuine awe. He looked at Stella, his eyes full of admiration. "You did it. You found the soul of the collection." Stella felt tears welling in her eyes, a profound sense of triumph and relief washing over her. She had proven them all wrong. She had followed her heart and secured a lost piece of history. She had honored Julian's trust. She was so lost in the moment, so captivated by the masterpiece before her that she didn't notice the look on Marcus's face. He stood slightly behind them, a silent observer. His expression was not one of awe or relief. It was a cold, reptilian stillness, his eyes fixed not on the painting, but on Stella's enraptured face. A slow, triumphant smile touched the corners of his mouth, a look of pure, predatory satisfaction. The trap had not only been sprung, the prey was now celebrating her own capture. The story of Stella and Julian is more than just a tale of telling off a billionaire. It's a story about the collision of two worlds and two value systems. It's about how honesty, a quality that seems to have no place in a world obsessed with wealth and power, can become the most valuable currency of all. Stella didn't just get a black card. She earned a platform to change a man's soul and build a legacy of true, authentic art. But with powerful enemies like Marcus Thorne lurking in the shadows, her journey is far from over. Will her artist's intuition be enough to detect a forgery designed to ruin her? Can her fragile alliance with Julian withstand a betrayal that strikes at the very heart of the foundation? If you were captivated by Stella's courage and want to see how this high-stakes game of art, power, and deception plays out, please hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs a reminder of their own power, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring the bell. The next chapter in this incredible story is coming soon, and you won't want to miss it.